So a little bit about me. I already kind of introduced myself to a couple of you, but just to reintroduce myself, I'm a science communicator for JILA, which is a partnership between the University of Colorado Boulder and the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We do cutting edge research on quantum, atomic, molecular physics, as well as astrophysics, chemphys, and biophys. When I'm not working there, writing for their magazine Light and Matter and doing a bunch of other fun things, I am a staff writer for the Quantum Daily and their sister companies, the Metaverse Insider and the Deep Tech Insider, and the Quantum Daily is now the Quantum Insider. They rebranded. And then I'm also a staff writer for the Debrief, which covers more broad topics in science and technology and defense. So I get a nice diversity in topics from those two. When I'm not doing either of those, I also am a podcaster. So I have two podcasts. One of them discusses the human side of science and scientific research called Human Angle. So doing that as well. This past year, I was a National Association of Science Writers panelist on deep technology and quantum technology. So speaking to science writers around the country about the science of quantum technology and how to communicate it and the barriers of communicating it. Which was really, really fun. So I've had talks like this before where I've been talking, of course, not to investors or people who are already in the field, but to writers. So hopefully my talk will be interesting for you. But yeah, the beats I cover are obviously quantum, deep tech, metaverse, physics research and academia, and then diversity and popular culture. So quite a mix there, and I love all of it. So why does, let me minimize that. Why does accurate writing matter when it comes to quantum specifically? I kind of summed it up in two different memes here because I thought they were both really funny and interesting. But just kind of quantum can often be really misunderstood because it's a very hard concept and very, very tricky to understand even for scientists as they're still researching it, obviously. So having the most accurate writing that you can is really, really beneficial because it just saves a lot of paperwork and time. And it also just makes things more interesting. And that way you can add on to it later as the research advances. So obviously other things, you're describing difficult physics, as I mentioned, and technology concepts for an end goal. So a lot of times if you're a quantum startup or if you're an investor, it might be something like approval or patenting or marketing, but it could also be things like research funding, grants and things like that, or publications. So all of those need accurate writing for quantum technology. So I'm going to talk a little bit about tips for communicating quantum technology better. Again, these might be really self-explanatory to you, or you've heard of them before, but this is kind of my field of expertise and just stuff that I've gained over the time that I've spent reporting on quantum technology and interviewing big companies, as well as talking to key players in this field. So hopefully there's stuff in here that's helpful for you. And again, if there's any questions, feel free to stop me. This is, of course, hopefully not going to be a writing class. I don't want you to feel like it is. These are just overall tips that I think are really helpful for anybody in the field. So of course, the first question people will ask you if you're like, oh, I'm investing in quantum technology, or I have a quantum technology startup, or I work at Honeywell, is what exactly does your technology do? So of course, when you want to answer that question, you want to make sure it's accurate, but also really engaging. So having an emotional connection is really, really important. So recently I wrote an article about quantum sensors and helping with diagnosing Alzheimer's and dementia, which are really, really beneficial and obviously can help a lot of lives and save a lot of people from just emotional pain or suffering. But this adds an emotional connection to the technology itself. So people might say, oh, I have a grandmother who has dementia. This is another step of gaining that common ground with your audience. The second thing is obviously showing the benefits of the technology. So, talking about things that quantum computing can do specifically. Obviously, all of us are here because we like the benefits. We want to learn more. We're really interested in this technology, but not being vague about the benefits is really beneficial. So I know a lot of times people are like, oh, quantum computing is going to be faster or better. But that doesn't really explain like how specifically it will be faster at whatever problem it's trying to solve, or how specifically it will be better overall. So being really specific is really helpful. So like the stuff I have down here is like computing population growth or computing inflation. Both of those things could be great to compute on a quantum computer, possibly, but currently not at this stage. And again, it's just a benefit that we have. The third thing is obviously keeping it simple. So, if you're trying to explain the qubit process and what qubits are made of and how they work, you might end up boring people quite quickly. So instead, maybe just talking about why it's going to help and going back to the first 2 points of benefits and emotional connection are really beneficial. So usually after that, people will ask, well, how will it affect me personally? Because we're all selfish people and we want to be part of the story and we want to know how we're connected to this thing. So again, we tend to try to make connections more personal. So referencing family members or friends or, some sort of relation to the individual itself is really, really beneficial there. And then obviously a cost benefit analysis. A lot of times investors, startups, or people who are funding these people obviously want to see a cost benefit analysis because that's really beneficial at getting to the nitty gritty details. So that can be helpful. And then again, keeping it simple. The biggest thing I've noticed for writing and for marketing or whatever is making sure your audience is at the center, not the technology, which I think a lot of people get confused about. Of course, we all want to champion quantum technology, but it's also, if you want to champion it properly, you need to make sure that the individual is at the center because that's who the quantum technology is benefiting, not the technology itself. Hopefully that makes sense. So where can we communicate all of this stuff better? Pretty much just anywhere, whether it's a marketing campaign, which I have done a bunch of, whether it's writing a grant proposal, whether it's writing a paper, whether it's talking at a seminar like this, or whether it's sharing with friends or family. Needless to say, it's always good to be accurate or to keep things simple and easy when you're communicating. So yeah, you can do that everywhere. So the biggest thing that I found with writing about quantum technology is kind of the reputations or connotations it already has. Unfortunately for all of us getting into the quantum industry, the public tends to think that it's magical, and that's partly because of the film industry. So I wrote quite an intense article about how quantum technology has been used as a magic replacement within film and popular culture. And that's because the word quantum itself is so confusing and tends to alienate people because obviously none of us are quantum physicists, that people automatically are like, oh, this is alienating me, it must be magic. So it makes things easier for people, especially, script writers, to be like, oh, well, let's just throw the word quantum in here and this will be fine. Unfortunately for us, though, that tends to have kind of negative connotations because then people think that if you're out in the real world doing real quantum research or developing real technology, you have to battle with this reputation of saying, well, no, it's not actually magic. We're actually doing real work. And here's kind of the limits that this technology has, and here's the challenges we're trying to overcome. So it's been really interesting to write about things like that and to talk about the barriers that we're trying to push down to get farther and advance our technology. So that's just another thing to think about as well. It is just, if you're communicating quantum technology, just remember the background it has, especially within popular culture, and especially if you're talking to a public member. So yeah, just again, this is the reputation we have to overcome in communicating this technology accurately. I don't think, if you're speaking to people within the industry, obviously people are serious enough that they're going to be like, yeah, this is technology, it's not magic. But especially for marketing campaigns, I know this is a really big deal. So again, how do we separate the magic from the machine? We have to show the limits. Obviously, we have to kind of bring people down to earth and say, here's our current limitations. We're keeping the quantum computer in an extremely cold temperature. Qubits are very fragile, things like that. And so obviously we're showing this isn't magic. It's just really, really fragile and it's really, really cool technology and we're trying to advance things. But then we're also talking about what we're previously building off of. So, we're talking about Einstein and Schrodinger and, how we're trying to advance the knowledge that we currently have to advance our technology and benefit society. So all those things help to kind of break down this reputation. But again, effective communication, writing, marketing strategies can really help. And especially if you know your target audience, that can help as well. If you're targeting investors, you know, obviously you're going to want a different message than if you're targeting the general public. So all good things to know. And then obviously, I think this is a big one too, is showing a face to your technology. You know, studies have shown that people tend to linger on pictures of people more than machines or more than inanimate objects, just because we are a selfish species. So putting something that's more relatable, whether it's a leader like I have up here, like CTO, CEO, engineer, or just somebody in the field or whatever, that can be really, really helpful, especially if you're marketing the technology, to show that there are real people, they are working on this. They're, you know, very, very passionate about what they do, and they're very, very brilliant. And we want to show the work that they're doing. I can't tell you how many times I've really just enjoyed interviewing people within the quantum industry and just see the passion that they have and the enjoyment that they have talking about the technology that they're building, or a challenge that they're working really hard to overcome. You know, they're like, oh man, you know, we currently are looking at this and we're not quite sure how to get over it, but we're really excited. Those are just moments for me as a writer that really I try to convey in the article by using their quotes, because they're just so individualized and so golden for a story. So yeah, I think showing that personal side is really, really beneficial because people tend to latch onto it more. So yeah, again, depending on the size of the company, the products, or, you know, an investment portfolio, the face will differ, obviously. So yeah, so I'm going to go now into transitioning into marketing it specifically. So that was just kind of a broad, here's how to communicate it. Now, of course, I'm going to go into marketing it in general, because communication isn't just for grants, but also for marketing, as I mentioned before. Marketing obviously can make things look professional, successful, attract more interest in funding. And in here, I'll talk a little bit about kind of the free PR, quote unquote, that you can get from working with journalists, which is often really, really nice and stuff that I do all the time. So again, as I mentioned before, you know, maintain an eye on the future, keep the benefits in mind, make it personal, emotional, don't make it magical. Very easy stuff. So yeah, so if I am a journalist, I'm looking at quantum industry, you know, I want to talk to somebody at a company, and this is really great for that company because they get free PR in a sense, where their company shows up in this article that I'm writing. There's a link to their website. You know, there might be a picture of the CEO or whoever I'm talking to, or the logo. It obviously gets tagged in social media, and then the company can retag it. These are all just really great things because the cycle works great for the publication as well. So for instance, the Quantum Insider, where I work at, you know, we'll we just actually interviewed Pascal and Q & Co. because they merged. Great for both companies because we were able to tag them both on social media. They tagged us. Great for our business as well. So again, this is kind of free PR because you're not paying anybody to put out a story. You're just taking maybe 10 minutes out of your day to talk to somebody for an article. Very, very easy to do. But you want to make sure that your company is marketable to go in an article. So that's why I brought this up, because as a journalist, you know, there's a lot of quantum industry companies out there that would be interesting to cover, but you know, what specifically am I looking for when I'm looking for an article, or what do I want to come to the story with, and how does that help you as a company to come to me and have this working relationship for this article? So yeah, so we're going to go into that, and that'll be hopefully really beneficial for people. So again, we want a really good story. So the Pascal and Q & Co merger, really good story because these two companies, it's surprising, they're great, you know, software meets hardware. Obviously, hopefully we'll have some really great breakthroughs and just advancements. So yeah, automatically, you know, I really wanted that story and I wanted to interview the people for that story. So yeah, so the first thing is if you're a quantum company and you're like, I really want a journalist to come cover us for an article, or I really want our names to be in the news a lot more, make sure that you have a good story to tell, whether that's, you know, something that hasn't happened before, like a merger, a partnership, new leadership, or something that's emotional, like we talked about earlier. So, you know, bios on people or victories or failures. So an example here would be the Women in Quantum series that I write. These are literally just biographies on women within the industry but they're really powerful articles because the women talk about how they got in the industry, the barriers that they've had to overcome, and where they currently are and how they're surviving and thriving, which are really, really good stories, because they have that nice underdog pitch, and then they go into a great victorious ending, which is really, really nice. And usually those articles also end on how the industry can be improved. So they have something at the end that the reader can latch onto as well. And then obviously you want, as a journalist, you want something that will sell. So if your company is, brand new, you just started it, or you merged with somebody, that's going to sell a lot more than if your company has been in the industry forever and you haven't had anything new going on. So this is all good information to have if you're a quantum company or if you're an investor to look at, especially if you're an investor too, because you want to see where a company that you might want to invest in has appeared in the news and why. So these things are really helpful because you're like, oh, this was a really good story, that's why they were in the news. Or, oh, they have a new person, that's why they're in the news. So these are, again, really, really valuable pieces of information to have when you're looking at either talking to a journalist or ending up in a publication somewhere. Perfect. All right. So tips for speaking with journalists, because this is really beneficial. Again, some of us have probably already talked to journalists, but it's also just really good know-how for just easy conversation, because I know a lot of scientists and a lot of researchers, specifically, not industry people per se, but a lot of researchers and scientists get really flustered when talking to journalists because, of course, everything's on the record and they don't feel like they can go back and redo things, or they have to say something really specific and really accurate. It's fine to go back and redo things with the journalists. Journalists are very, very flexible, usually depending on the deadline, but having a good relationship with the journalist is essential for good PR for a company, because then you have a nice access to what's going on in the market and how you can stand out. So being specific, obviously, with journalists, so sometimes it's good to repeat part of a question. So if I ask, what are your future goals for the company? Somebody might be like, well, my future goals are this. And that's really great as a journalist because it saves me time with my quoting. Obviously, it's okay to say, I don't know. This is a big one for scientists that, most of the time people just kind of BS an answer if they don't want to admit that they don't know something. So this is something to remember as well, is that it's okay to say, I don't know. And you can also tell a journalist, I don't really like what I said earlier. Can you please take that out? Or can I rephrase this? Journalists are, again, very, very flexible. The other thing is, I think people forget the rights that they have when speaking to a journalist or somebody like this, where, if you have something that is recorded or if you have notes that are taken, you can always ask for a copy of the recording or take a look at the notes, depending on the deadline. My methods as a journalist are very atypical. I tend to go through 2 or 3 rounds of editing with my interviewee, which most journalists do not do because they're on a strict deadline. But I find that it comes out with more satisfying articles that have a personal flavor of the interviewee, and they tend to be more satisfied in the end about the article because they've had more chances to edit it, whether it's just their quotes and then their quotes in the draft. Again, I just find that that's better because they're able to have that conversation multiple times and say, okay, I want to make sure this is really what I said. But they also start to develop a relationship with me more. So I go back and forth with them and I get to know them a bit better. And it's great too, because they can come back to me later and say, oh, I have this new thing. Can you cover this in another article? Or I might go to them and say, oh, I saw that you're doing this thing. I really would like to write about this. All good things to have. So again, you can always ask for a recording, ask for notes, depending on a deadline. Just check with the journalists. Again, most of them are flexible. You can also ask to change things later or get a look at the article, depending on the journalist. Again, every journalist is different, and depending on the deadline, things might change. So how to attract journalists? So again, we talk about, here's what journalists are looking for, here's how to talk to them. But let's say you want to attract journalists, or say, I really want to get my company tagged on social media, or I really want to get out and get more stuff on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's like the big one for quantum technology, which is great. But yeah, so there's really easy things you can do to attract journalists. The first thing is sometimes you have to reach out to a journalist. I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me and said, hey, I have this product, or I'm looking at this technology. Would you mind writing an article? And I'm like, absolutely. Let me look into it and see if it's worth pursuing. It's great because then I start a relationship with that person and I get to talk more and I get to learn more about their company, and they get to end up being a really good story. So yeah, sometimes you have to reach out to them because journalists like me, we cover quite a few beats, quite a few different avenues, and we might not see everything. Of course, obviously, if you're doing something really big, you might be on our radar, but again, reaching out and just double checking is great. I know specifically for me, like people at the AQT lab at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory have reached out to me multiple times and said, hey, we have this new thing. Can you write an article about it? It's great. It's just super easy because then I'm like, yeah, of course. You put it on my radar. I have more time. This is perfect. The second thing is maintaining a relationship with the journalist. So, instead of just saying, here's an interview, I'm done, having that back and forth, or at least getting on good terms with the journalist is really good because, again, we might want to cover you again, or if you need another article somewhere, you can obviously reach out to that journalist again and say, oh, hey, I'd really like this article done. So again, having that back and forth and that relationship is really good. Giving something good, so having good products, having a new president or a new leader is really beneficial. Giving information easily is probably a really big one too. Sometimes people tend to trip over their words when they're talking, or they don't want to give something away too easily, or they want to be a little more vague or really, really accurate, so they don't say things the right way. That can all be really tricky. But also giving just information, like basic information, is really, really beneficial because as a journalist, I might not have time to dig up, background details. If you could just tell me, it'd be way easier. So things like that you need to keep in mind to attract journalists. And then of course, being open to interviews and questions. If you're hard to get a hold of, your company might be passed over because we can't get a hold of you for a quote or an interview. So making yourself open to that, being friendly and being able to answer questions are really beneficial. So again, all really good things to attract free PR. Okay, so taking a sharp left turn, because this kind of has stuff to do with the stuff I just talked about before, but now I'm going to go over kind of diversity in the quantum technology industry, because this is one of the main things I write about. Again, I write a Women in Quantum series for the Quantum Insider, and this is covering women within the industry, whether it's in academia, whether it's in technology, whether it's a CTO of a startup, or whether it's an engineer, or whether it's a nonprofit organization leader within the industry. All of these women are absolutely fantastic, and it really highlights what's going on in the industry itself. So I'll be speaking a bit more about the industry as a whole. But as a writer for this series, I can tell you that I have a pretty good pulse on what's going on. So yeah. Okay, so why diversity matters. I feel like this slide has to go up just in general because it's a good introduction. Diversity in the industry is directly tied to the reputation of the industry, its workforce, and the success of the industry as a whole. So if you're an industry that promotes diversity, you're gonna be way better off than an industry that pretends to promote diversity and then doesn't actually. And people, I can tell you, people in my generation and younger, are really looking at things like this, and diversity, especially because we're going to have a workforce shortage in the quantum industry, is going to be really beneficial as a way to help bring in more people, bring in more perspectives, and hopefully help save that workforce shortage. So again, this is something that we really need to keep in mind within the quantum industry specifically. But yeah, if you want to discuss the benefits and personal connections that we were talking about before, you got to understand the diversity of your target audience. Even if it's just investors in, the California area, or if it's, the general public, it's just really good to know who's out there, what perspectives they might have, and how you can include them. And as I mentioned, it's going to expand that quantum workforce. So a lot of people are worried about the workforce shortage. So this will help expand that, giving more properly trained individuals with better perspectives, and hopefully will advance the technology. So all good things.
Kenna, sorry, just to clarify, do you mean diversity as in women in their work in this field, or you mean all diversity?
All diversity. I'm meaning women, LGBTQ, people of color, everything.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, no, good, great question. Thank you, Russ. Yeah, absolutely. And the nice thing is the quantum industry is global. So we are getting people from those backgrounds in the industry already. And I can tell you the women I have interviewed for my articles have all said, you know, the industry itself is getting better at including diversity, but it still needs to be improved, which is why we're talking about it today. So yes, so diversity takes work, but it pays off in the end. So obviously, if you're looking for good PR, diversity is a great place to do that. Or if you're looking for more trained employees, again, looking at a more diverse pool of applicants can be really, really beneficial. And as I mentioned, you know, we focus more on diversity as a younger generation than the previous generations. It's just something that we're being mindful of. So that's something to think about too when you are looking at marketing or investing in a quantum company. But being diverse, of course, takes work. A lot of times you might have to hire from the outside or in areas you may not have thought about, and get out of comfort zones. And you may meet people you never thought you would meet, but all of these pay off in the end because, again, it looks really good for PR. You might get more properly trained people. And of course, you get great perspectives that are very different and can solve real problems. So all benefits. So ways to cultivate diversity, because this is also really, really beneficial. Because a lot of companies might say, you know, Kenna, that's great. Diversity is awesome. How do I do that? Or what could we be doing better? And so it's really, really important to look at ways to cultivate this. So looking at the incoming quantum workforce is really, really helpful. Again, looking at, you know, your current pool of PhD students or postdocs that might want to move from academia into industry. Where are they coming from? What backgrounds are missing from this pool and how can you accommodate this? Are all going to be really, really beneficial. Or looking at, you know, we need somebody to fill a engineering position. Maybe let's hire outside of our regular pool and get somebody new with a better perspective. That's also really beneficial. Looking at what motivates the workforce, obviously goals, personal goals, and career goals are all going to be beneficial. But the biggest thing is if you want to create diversity, you need to create a value statement because these values can be used to evaluate company culture and amend as needed. And then you can also evaluate yourself, how people are treated, things like that. So I know JILA is in the process of doing a value statement, which is really, really beneficial. And I can tell you it's already paid off quite a bit for our culture. But of course, that's academia and not quite industry. So where the industry currently sits, as I mentioned, thankfully things are changing, but currently it's not really that great because the industry tends to be, not surprisingly, male individuals from mostly white backgrounds. But again, the quantum industry is quite global. So we're getting quite a few companies from India, quite a few companies from China, quite a few companies from Korea or Singapore. And it's great because so many of these companies are popping up from all over the world. And so they're starting to talk with each other. People are starting to mingle and it's becoming quite better. So these are just a few examples of the Women in Quantum series that I've done. And again, I've covered women of all ages, backgrounds, places within the industry or within academia. And again, it can be extremely frustrating for women specifically. And again, I'm only speaking for women right now because I've interviewed them. It can be extremely frustrating, but really rewarding because they come into their own place. They have mentors who help them, supporters, and they know that their place in the industry is helping other women and other people. So there is a culture shift that is beginning to happen and this industry is becoming better, but it will be a process. So just, again, good things to know if you are a quantum startup, if you're a quantum company, or if you're investing. Looking at the diversity of the industry as a whole is really, really beneficial. So if you're looking at organizations to follow or use for helping to improve diversity, these are all great. I have chatted with all three of these before, or there's 5 on here, but I chatted with 3 of these on here. So Women in Quantum is part of One Quantum. One Quantum, of course, is an organization that's global. They support people from all different backgrounds and try to work on making sure that quantum technology is accessible for everyone. The Q with the arrow at the bottom is Qubit by Qubit. They were started by a girl in her mid-20s, very young, but they teach students about quantum computing from a very young age. So they're already training the next workforce, which is wonderful. They've been developing a curriculum that is mobile friendly, especially for people in developing countries who don't have computers, and they're able to access this on their phones to be able to learn how to do quantum computing directly from their phones. So again, all really good things for improving diversity, and all of these should be on somebody's list to follow because they're just really, really beneficial. I thought this was a great quote. So I wrote a very long article about the diversity in the community, and I interviewed Dr. Tina Brower-Thomas, who is a person of color. She is a Harvard University research professor and a visiting faculty at Harvard. She's great. She's wonderful, but she talks a lot about how we need to not only cultivate diversity by offering value statements, looking at the workforce, but also making sure that everybody feels included by making sure that everything is accessible to everyone. So there's this idea, of course, that people are like, well, this isn't for me, or this isn't for my people. That's not true. We need to make sure that we are re-educating people to better market quantum technology where it is for everybody, where everybody is allowed to participate, to have their own say, to give their perspective. So this is just another thing to think about in the industry as a whole for diversity, is making sure people don't feel censored from being part of this. So yeah, so don't just write about it. So for me personally, I obviously write about diversity, but I also try to help be a leader in there. So within JILA, I co-lead a JEDI group, which just stands for JILANs, for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And we try to work on creating a better culture. So I think a lot of people see a diversity position as a charged position, as a controversial position. You know, again, it's a lot of work, but it is definitely worth it. And I think if more people took the reins in this regard, it would be really, really beneficial. And we would probably end up with a lot more benefits in the industry that we're missing out on currently. So yeah, so not just communicating about it, or not just talking about it and saying, oh, I wish diversity was here, that would be great. Actually going out and doing it is really kind of the key, obviously. So predictions for the coming years for quantum technology. This is another interesting thing that I've been keeping my ears and eyes open for, writing about quantum technology and just seeing kind of the trends that are happening. And obviously, since we're all here and we're all in the quantum industry, you know, this might be beneficial as well. So yeah, what do I see? So obviously we're going to see more of a media craze on quantum technology and its potentials, which should not be a big surprise for people. We're already, you know, quantum technology's already made a splash quite a bit in the headlines, but we'll keep seeing that ramp up, especially with the benefits of quantum computing and how we're advancing the technology, which is great. Obviously, what I see is big VC firms trying to corner the market for owning the technology. So people getting in there right now and quickly before things get more expensive, or before you know, things start getting more and more competitive. I think a lot of firms are trying to go in and snap up some stuff right now and take advantage of the early market. So good for them. Hopefully we'll see more breakthroughs, which would be great. But it's a process. I can tell you from seeing it both from the industry side and the research side, it's going to take some time, but it's very, very interesting, and it's very, very rewarding when these breakthroughs do happen. And of course, we've been seeing a lot of mergers recently for quantum companies. So hopefully those mergers will help with some of these interesting breakthroughs. So yeah, and then to follow up on that, obviously we're going to probably see more startups, partnerships between academia and industry, which a lot of quantum startups come from academia and then go into industry. So that's not surprising. And then more niches open up within the industry where people are looking at quantum computing for specific things. So all
And then,
good predictions. Oh, sorry. Yes.
On this slide, can you talk a little about what you're seeing in Colorado? Because I think most of us are in San Diego.
Right.
And I'd say Steve, Russ, and I, we don't see a lot. And you say it's a very busy culture up there with quantum.
Yeah, absolutely. So here I can tell you, obviously we have companies like Cold Quanta and Honeywell here in Boulder, and I believe we have quite a few more, and those are just the two that are coming to my head. But, a lot of them are hiring, obviously, which is no surprise because they want to get more people in the door. Here it's quite a busy place because everybody's got this nice buzz where they're really, really excited about the technology, and they're really, really excited about what it's going to do. And I think the other thing too is we have NIST, which has a big part of quantum research, and then we have JILA, which also does a big part of quantum research. And those two groups are doing breakthroughs as well in research. So I think there's this nice little competitive back and forth between the industry side of the community here and the research side. But also everybody's just really excited because all these, companies are so close in the state that people are doing a lot of crosstalk and being really excited about things.
And then I'm going to take a pause here. So Anna and then Valerie just joined too. If you two have any questions for Kenna. And then let me know if, let's see the mic here. If not, that's fine. And then you can go ahead and continue.
Great. And if I'm talking too quickly, I understand. I get very excited in chat quite quickly, but hopefully people are understanding. And again, if there's any questions, please ask. And of course, if there's any questions at the end, feel free to ask too. So the overall thing I was just going to say is this era, the next 5 years, the next 10 years when it comes to quantum technology is really full of potential because we've already seen some really, really interesting things. Obviously, a lot of this technology is, gearing up to hopefully advance and improve some interesting breakthroughs. It'll just be a matter of time to see what happens. But as a science writer, I can tell you that I'm really, really excited. And just the people I talk to as well, all of them are very excited to see where the technology goes and what we're going to be able to do with it in the future. With our potential, obviously, the other thing too is like keeping ethical questions and inclusivity in mind as well to make sure everyone can benefit, not just people who design it in a lab.
Ken, do you hear about, or do you believe, people worry about some sort of quantum winter where things get so overhyped that the pendulum swings the other way and it loses its esteem? Do you run into that? Is that a legitimate thing, you think?
That's a great question. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I hope everybody's okay with that. I did put up my email right here in case people do want to contact me separately. Anna, I did see your message. Thank you so much. So yes, quantum winter, that is a great question. I can tell you that I do believe, with any technology, quantum technology tends to be hyped quite a bit. And currently, I think the biggest one that's in the hype cycle is metaverse technology because of the Facebook Meta thing. I think for me as a writer, I try to stay away from that hype as much as possible, just because, again, I don't want to add to the problem of hyping it. I think the biggest thing that I try to do to not do that is to, again, talk about the limits and just talk about the process itself of developing that technology. But I can tell you that, yes, there is definitely some hype out there. And I think as a reader, if you're reading an article about quantum technology, again, looking for those limits or looking for the overall process can help you determine if it's really being hyped up or not. If that answers your question.
Some of the hype is maybe even inadvertent. I hear so many times people talk about numbers of qubits.
Yes.
And no one, very rarely do people distinguish between a logical and a physical qubit, which are a world of difference. And I think that leads to some of it also is just misunderstanding makes people think the wrong things or hear exaggerated things.
Absolutely. I can tell you as well from a research side, I think a lot of people as well are really excited about like the theoretical side too, just kind of what you were mentioning of like, well, theoretically these qubits should work like this or whatever. And I think, separating that from reality is really, really important. So yeah, that's a really good point, Russ.
Thank you.
And then, so for those who just joined, so Kenna had touched about journalism, basically reach out to journalists. Journalists, it's important to establish relationships with journalists. And the other, you talked about Colorado, and I think that we could still learn a lot about as far as, the buzz. You mentioned the buzz. And I think in San Diego, we're not quite grasping that. I would say, and you had mentioned LinkedIn with, the things are going on in LinkedIn with quantum for sure. And then also Val, so she talked about diversity, cultivating diversity. I had a question. So basically, if a company, companies hire, they just like feel like a need and then they hire somebody. Is it good to go to have HR and then go on a string of hires for diversity too? I just want to see your take on that, because you did say it's really important to do these things. It pays off in the end with PR. But I guess, do you have any other tips with that as far as instead of just hiring on the whim of having, I guess, a more organized hiring structure?
Sure. No, that's an excellent question, Kevin. So I can tell you, at least from the people that I've interviewed, where they say, I got in this position that I'm currently in because of a mentor or because of somebody I knew. I think networking is probably the biggest thing that I know for hiring for diversity is, whether it's somebody that and says, oh, hey, I have this person who's a really great recommendation, or I think it would be a really good fit. Or just cultivating a relationship with somebody, or even mentoring somebody. I've really tried to highlight the importance of mentoring people for including diversity, because so many, PhD students, postdocs, people from academia who end up in this field, need mentors who are industry specific. Mm-hmm. Because again, they're not used to the industry side, or they don't exactly know what's going on. So having somebody who can mentor them or say, here's what's going on currently in the industry, or here's what I think you would appreciate, can help them to put themselves in that person's shoes and say, oh, I see myself fitting in here.
Sure. I guess with any startup, like you were talking about, all the media craze, VC firms, startups that we'll see more of. So obviously Russ had mentioned that, beware of all the hype with logical physical qubits and stuff like that. But I think the key with all of this is just more planning, and it's hard when you're in an early stage, quantum startup that you don't know what's going on. Exactly. And you're waiting for that next big headline, So do you have any other suggestions with that as far as especially with the workforce is to get a diverse workforce in a time of uncertainty?
Yeah. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding your question correctly. You're asking about preparing for a better workforce, or you're asking for how to plan for a big quantum boom sort of thing?
Well, I guess I'd say for early stage startups, it's really hard for us because we don't know exactly what's going to happen next.
Sure.
To plan, say to plan 6 or 12 months out with the type of people or, diverse individuals in our specific company, it's tricky. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think so. So again, I'm not a person of a startup company, although my dad has been on multiple startup companies that I've oddly enough advised him with. But I think the biggest thing is, the nice thing is with COVID, everybody is working remotely, or most people are. So I think currently right now, the internet is being used and appreciated a lot more. And I think that's a good place to find people. But again, I think it goes back to networking. Where for startups, it is all about networking. It's all about who you know and who you can leverage for contacts, or who you could reach out to for funding or marketing or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think you kind of have to go the same direction with hiring as well, and saying, who do I know that might have somebody for this position, or who could I reach out to on LinkedIn, or who do I know at a talk that I'm going to, or whatever could be really beneficial.
Yeah, sure. That's definitely helpful advice. So if anybody else has questions right now, so you should see the LinkedIn here. So one of the things that we didn't talk about is the Big Tedx Talk. So how did that come about?
Okay, so let me preface by saying that this has nothing to do with quantum technology or the quantum industry.
Yeah, I don't know that.
So I will start by saying that obviously it can be really easy to tell, but I'm a very young person in this industry. I'm one of the youngest people writing. I'm the only woman at the Quantum Insider. So it's been a very interesting road as a writer to come into this, pretty much the same age as a student, to talk about writing and whatnot. So I've always been that person who has done things that are designed for older people at a younger age. And this TEDx talk is one of those things. So I was 18 when I did this talk. I was about to leave for college. My background is in English and biology. I have 2 degrees from Colorado State University. I have a master's in science communication from Imperial College in London. So I already knew that I was planning on being a wordsmith. I didn't quite know how to marry the science part of it yet when I was giving this talk, but I really enjoyed doing slam poetry and writing, and that's where this talk came about. Was, again, all about who you know, and I ended up meeting somebody through my graduation who said, we're putting on this event, we'd like you to speak, and so I did.
So the previous speaker, Chris Bishop, he basically said that he was very rushed in the whole thing. And they were like, okay, get on the stage. And his was New York, maybe extra pressure too. And then his whole thing was he sang the Kit Kat song. And that's what made the audience kind of rise up a little bit. So I had listened to, I think, 1 or 2 of these. Can you just give an explanation to the viewer?
Sure. Yeah, so I started this when I was doing my master's degree in London. I'd always wanted to do a podcast. People were saying that I had a radio voice, which is really nice because a lot of times people want to do a podcast and they don't have a radio voice, which is quite sad. But I wanted to discuss the human side of a scientist and what goes in the research process and who this person is as a person and what they have struggled with. Because I didn't think that was being covered. Obviously, science and technology are such performance-based, industries where your funding comes from how much you publish, how much you perform. So it's really nice to get the human side of things. And that's kind of where I'm at as a writer as well, when I'm interviewing people. But this was just another way to take a break from writing, which I do way too much of, and do something fun. The podcast has been going on for about, I think this is its 3rd year. I'm just starting the 4th season. It's had 4 different co-hosts, and my co-host is my mother, thanks to COVID. But she's great, and she always wanted to be a disc jockey back when she was in her 20s. And so I told her, well, podcasting is the current version of disc jockeying. So
there's out an important piece with these is their sound effects.
Yes.
There's an introduction that's that doesn't happen in every place, and they're very well done. Like I said, I listened to 1 or 2 of these. So this is what you see on their website. So you said you're their only female quantum writer?
I am, yeah. So I am in a boys club of writers, which they're all very, very nice, and it's great. But
I was surprised that there's so many of these.
Yeah, that's part of the reason I cover women in quantum is because I am the female writer on staff.
And they go back to September, it looks like, on those 2. And then you had mentioned this one, and I actually came across this type of thing where it's basically there's an advantage. Could you tell us what the advantage is for the quantum sensor here?
Yeah, so this is still being developed, obviously. This was a press release that came out, I think probably January 3rd or 4th, so it was brand new. But they're talking about using quantum sensors to make brain scanning technology easier and cheaper to use, and more accurate as well. Since the brain has magnetic fields, these quantum sensors can sense those magnetic fluctuations better. They can read a brain scan better. So, for our overall healthcare, it would save a lot of money, which is a great story, again, for writing it. Yeah, great story.
I want to say with these, it gets away with the liquid helium. So you could place it closer to the scalp. So here, this is going to be a game. This is basically your website, right?
So this is not my website. Again, this is the Quantum Insider website.
Oh,
So
Insider. Okay. So this is a who's who. So if you,
yes,
basically these are shout outs. Do you have a shout out for any of these people? There's 12.
So I did not actually write this article. James did, who's a wonderful writer as well. But so what this article came out before I started the Women in Quantum series. And around the same time this article came out was an article that I believe Matt Swain wrote, which is 52 women CTOs in the quantum industry, or 52 women in the quantum industry.
Wow.
But it was short little bios that were taken from Wikipedia or their websites. It wasn't anything personal. There weren't any quotes, people weren't getting contacted saying you're on this list. But they realized, Evan and Alex, the CEO and the president, realized that they were getting a lot of readership from these type of articles. And that's what kind of kicked off the Women in Quantum series was we need to have more in-depth articles where we talk to women one-on-one, give them a nice shout out, give a shout out to their company on LinkedIn or wherever they're working, and just talk about the industry as a whole.
Awesome. So again, we're going to scroll through. If you have, as far as like the technical quantum stuff that you're familiar with any of these authors here?
I haven't actually reached out to any of these women on the list. They're all on my list to reach out to. I have quite a long list of women in quantum to interview. Oh, Anna Maria Ray is actually at JILA, which is great. I work with her all the time. She's a wonderful person. But the nice thing, I think, having a long list of women to reach out to, having a long list of women you want to cover in articles is just showing how beneficial the diversity in the industry is and how much better it's getting when you have all these women to talk to.
So Christopher Bishop, who was on last week, he interviewed Alana, and then
she's great.
Yeah, we featured her in the discussion last week, and then this should be.
Yeah, I am surprised actually that you don't have Denise Ruffner on that list, which again, James wrote the article, so he put in who he wanted and who
right.
But she leads the nonprofit Women in Quantum.
So this came up last week and they said community. Are you familiar with community?
I am, yeah.
And then if you could
fantastic.
Speak a little bit, it's about Anisha here.
So I have not met Anisha personally, but she is a wonderful individual that I have heard lots of beneficial things about. And again, just a person who is very, very driven and charged, and just knows her stuff is awesome. So
yeah, it looks like the website's doing well. I came across this one. So this is DOE. So this is a feature. So obviously have you come across this one?
I haven't come across that one specifically, but again, the nice thing is this is getting a lot of momentum.
Yeah.
So it's getting published a lot of places.
And then this was last year, I believe.
Yep. They do a summit every year.
Were you a part of this or did you report on this?
So ironically enough, I was in the area at the time it was happening, but I did not go to the summit, but I did report on it because we had a couple students from JILA actually go. So this was hosted by that Women in Quantum organization, which Denise Ruffner is part of. They do it every year, which is great. And they just talk about, women in quantum and talking about the industry as a whole and things to do better and stories and just personal testimonies of women who are in the industry, which is excellent in my opinion.
Yeah, it looks pretty well established.
It's very well established. They've been having it for at least, I think, 5 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. So for us, Russ and Steve, because I remember Steve and we were just learning this on our own. How long would you say that you've been kind of serious about quantum, Russ?
Me, probably 2 years now.
Oh, wow.
Pretty much found myself locked in my house for COVID and thought, what can I do? And I always had a curiosity about quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
Let me study it. There's so much available on
Absolutely.
the web. It was
that sounds like a good article,
really
Russ. Locked in my house with quantum.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen that before. Quite a few people take the IBM QSIC, whatever it is. I can't remember how to pronounce it, but the quantum computing program through IBM, and they get certified to do quantum computing.
Yeah.
So this is one of my favorite posts in quantum, if not. So in order for things to be taught to children, it has to be fairly well established and believable. Like I said, out here in San Diego, we don't get too much as far as people running up to you and telling you about how awesome quantum is. You get more questions about like, what is quantum?
Exactly.
So this is awesome. And I think it speaks volumes to the industry that they're paying teachers to teach something that's figured out enough as far as qubits, entanglement, superpositioning. And when I saw this, I was like, whoa, this is the next level in development. Like some people look for qubits, but when it's being taught to little kids, that's a whole nother level.
Absolutely. I know. So for me, I had a physics professor when I was an undergraduate, and he ran the Little Shop of Physics. And it was a traveling physics educational group. And they didn't teach on quantum specifically, but they did teach a lot about quantum mechanics. And I can just tell you that it was such a fulfilling experience. And they targeted, inner city areas in Denver and other areas that are underfunded in Colorado, and it just really paid off. So yeah, absolutely.
You had mentioned one partnership. Here's another one.
Yep.
Would anybody like to comment on this? Because I hear a lot of good things about strange work.
This is a triple partnership, Kevin.
Yes, it is.
Continuum is a merger of
Honeywell,
and now this collaboration with Strangeworks.
Yeah. So it's always interesting because you look at all these and you think, okay, which of these companies are going to last? And I think it's absolutely crucial to do partnerships now.
It's really interesting for me as a writer because I look at these partnerships and I think, well, everybody's kind of choosing a side almost. They're choosing a partner who they want to back and join. But yeah, absolutely. The partnerships, which is great because you end up sharing more information between partners than you would, just talking to somebody.
So yeah, Ken and Russ, when I first saw this, I was like, oh, wow, a quantum laptop. There's the gentleman, Brian Siegelwax. He's been a special speaker too. He said it's more like going to be, you're still going to have a CPU, a GPU. Now you're going to have a QPU in your laptop. So it's not going to be pure quantum. What do you think if this extends to? Anybody?
I'm just going to make the joke that you probably have to put the laptop in the freezer to store it.
Superconducting. Yeah. Yeah, like I said, you don't think you're a quantum expert, but out here you would be considered a quantum expert.
I'm just surrounded by quantum people, which is probably why it rubs off.
Yeah, quantum. So you talked about this one. Is there anything else you want to mention with that?
It's a really interesting merger because one of the companies is very hardware focused, one of the companies is very software focused. And so the merger will be very interesting because they'll be able to use the algorithms from the software company to help advance the hardware side and vice versa. And it's kind of an illustration of the trend that has been already happening, but will continue to happen, of software meets hardware when it comes to quantum, which is such a big deal anyway. So many companies focus on just the algorithms or just the hardware. And a lot of times the merger between the two is really beneficial. So yeah, it's a really cool idea.
Strangeworks has a leg up just because of the colors. The colors always kind of catchy. So this is an annealing article here. So we've talked a lot about quantum annealing, and basically, it seems to be the only one to have real applications these days. Finance and transportation. So this is D-Wave, and then it's company Savant. Did you come across this one, Kenna?
So my coworker Matt is the one that wrote that article, obviously. So no, I didn't end up doing any of the research for it, but it's really interesting. Oh, thank you so much, Valerie. I hope you have a wonderful evening. And just again, it's another really cool application that is real world application of quantum technology.
And then I don't think this should be overlooked. Obviously, they're not the number one. Obviously, AWS is, and they just announced hybrid. But to see expansion like that, and then this is a Rob Hayes atom computing. And then it's basically, I can't make newer quantum computing modalities will achieve eye-opening breakthrough. What is, so as an expert in English, what is a modality, Kenna?
So if you pardon my French, but that title is complete bullshit.
You're not in favor of one, and then increase attention in NIST. Yeah.
So I mean, the title is bullshit in the sense that it is literally jargon to fill a title, which is stuff that I run across all the time. It's pretty much just saying, here's a new, piece of technology that we're going to talk about. New quantum computing technology.
Yeah, are you familiar with HPC Wire? Obviously,
I am. Yeah.
So but the article itself is worthy, right? Like it the meaning, because I've come across other thing. I came across a Forbes article late in December. Did you see that one with the next 2 years, meaning 2022,
Yes.
2023? And that's the article that I bank on because it says everything's going to, you know, basically switch from R&D to IT.
Yes.
So it says leading US and Chinese will double down on quantum computing. So it's basically more and more cloud investments in quantum will continue to break records. So that's big. So Russ or anybody else might want this. You've probably seen it before. So they actually said we finished up in 2021 with $3 billion in quantum investments. And then here you go. Diversity and inclusion will be a bigger focus. The research is clear. So going back to what you said, so I read, for everybody else, I read Kenna's, slides 2 or 3 times. She sent me them. And then I told her, I was like, wow, that's so true that every big company to get reputation is diverse. So did you guys come across this one, EuroQ?
I've heard of it before. I haven't looked into it specifically myself. I know I'm answering all of Kevin's questions. Everybody else jump in, please.
Yeah, and Ravi, thanks again for hopping on. I haven't heard from Ravi, but you could talk at any time. He's been on a couple times at a couple different discussions. But for me, this is huge. It says 9,600 square foot. I don't know if anybody recalls the AWS Caltech, how big that one. I think it's probably bigger than this. So anyway, these things are big, going into big places. And then this is, so Chris Bishop, who was on last week, his TEDx talk actually mentioned Watson Health. I don't know what this means, but I know IBM is huge into quantum.
So Watson is an AI program.
But why would they sell something like health?
So this is a health unit. So AI is making a huge splash in healthcare as far as diagnoses and that sort of thing. And so they're talking about, using AI to give better diagnoses, faster diagnoses. And so the Watson Health Unit is going to be that algorithm that does that.
Okay. So this is 74% of execs warn, I'll tell this to potential investors, either adopt quantum soon or risk. That's how I look at it. In 3 to 6 months, things I believe will be much different as far as the number of companies involved, the opportunities. I call 2021 the year of partnerships for quantum, and they keep going on. We just covered 3 or 4 of them. So a gentleman that's going to be on, I'll show you a picture a little bit down. Everybody's, all the special speakers picture is he looks at it the other way. And I know all this is going on is like classical is huge and they're trying to prevent quantum from breaking, stealing information, that kind of stuff. And I never come across that. I guess I never search for it, but this is one of those articles that pop up. So here's rising budgets. Okay, is everybody familiar with this, World Quantum Day? So Kenna, are you already signed up?
I am, yes. And it's funny because there's an organization that started last year called the Quantum Strategy Institute. I don't know if you've heard of it. They're big on LinkedIn, but they're trying to make a quantum strategy holiday as well. So this will not be the only quantum holiday we have.
When do you know when that would be? This is April 14th.
It is. I know I'm covering the article for them. I think they want to do something later in the summer because they don't want to interfere with this holiday.
And then Steve, this is like news to me. I signed up. Steve's my advisor for the company. And then if you have any questions for Kenna, Steve.
Kenna, are you for hire?
You said journalist.
I'm happy to write something for you, Steve. If you need anything, please let me know. I do quite a bit of freelancing on the side for just random.
That's what
things,
I mean. Yeah, marketing material.
Absolutely.
You did an excellent job. Your communication skills are top notch.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've done quite a bit of SEO and content writing. So yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. And yes, I'm more than happy to talk to you if you're interested.
Yeah. We'll talk maybe in a week.
Yeah. So Kenna said that she might want to hop off after an hour.
I do. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So one of the quantum computing discussions went for 6 hours with Brian. So I think Steve, you had stayed on for what, 3.5 hours?
Yeah, you kept going, Kevin. You're like the marathon man.
Well, it was Brian too. Brian was a special speaker. He stayed on, and then we just talked about quantum for 2 extra hours. So these are the special speakers. So Ryan actually worked on quantum computing hardware. And
that's fantastic.
He went to Q2B. You might recognize this guy right here.
I have no idea who he is, actually.
So Russ is an investor. He's very much interested in quantum. So Brian, he wrote a book called Dungeons and Qubits. You should write an article on Brian.
I will.
Yeah, he programs quantum computing with his fingers on his phone. And he wrote his 40-page book on his phone with his fingers.
Interesting.
Yeah, not even text. So Chris, he was on last week. He's also a TEDx speaker. He's 50 years into musical career. He worked for IBM for 12 years, and he's the host of the Inside Quantum Technology podcast. You've run across Chris?
I have, yes.
Yeah. So Chris, and then Lawrence Gassman, they run Inside Quantum Technology. Do you know the Hague?
I do, yeah.
Okay, she knows everything. So
I'm very well researched.
yeah. So the Hague is coming up. So Chris is going to be there. Lawrence, I think, officially runs it. We know the speaker here, Kenna. And so Brian is next week. So
Brian will be great. Ask him all about QSI.
QSI, okay.
The Quantum Strategy Institute. You can tell him I said hello too. He's wonderful.
Okay. Yeah, so Brian wrote the Quantum Boost book, and he says there's a lot of things in business you can do today that you can make money, I'm assuming, with annealing. Yeah. And then so Salvador is a professor in Mexico. He writes papers, and they seem like they're top-notch, like, cutting edge stuff. Doug is the one that I told you about. So Doug is basically to prevent quantum from breaking classical encryption. So his perspective will be interesting just because I never research it. So Chuck, I think, is also an investor, Chicago-based. And then so I reached out to him. And then I'm just missing like 1 or 2 spots for February, basically. And then Peter, so Kenna, Val, she goes to tech coffees that a bunch of us go to. Steve goes to them. And they're all over San Diego and towns called Del Mar, Kensington. And then Peter, Peter, Val, Steve, who's on right now, and I go to these tech coffees. Peter is a Oracle director.
Wow.
And then he is very in tune with optimization. And I told him if he can relate it to quantum annealing. And he says, what's quantum annealing? So he's very up to date with, he's like, there's so much you can do with optimization. And then I would say for most of us in this panel, that's a welcome notion.
Sure.
Yeah.
If I could interject here, Kevin, I would recommend, if you have open slots for January, February, that you try to get another woman speaker, perhaps. And I'm happy to give you a recommendation or two if you would like. But just because, there are quite a few in the industry.
Yeah, it's either now or connect with me later. And then, so link us up. And then obviously, anything with quantum related is awesome. But yeah, I appreciate that, trying to fill up February there. And yeah, so this is the Southern California Quantum Computing Discussion, episode 13. Thanks again to Kenna for hopping on. Very proficient with the PowerPoint. And I guess the highlights is obviously diversity in quantum, and then journalism. She is for hire. I'll show you her LinkedIn page. I'm assuming you like to have other like-minded people add you on LinkedIn. So
I do. I've had a bunch of random people add me who I don't know, but I still let them because, it's a good connection. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, exactly. So Ravi, you too. And Ravi, if you know anybody else to hop on, I've been scrolling all day. So yeah, I want to get back to your LinkedIn here. So, people, again, because I didn't spend too much time on that slide. But yeah, send me over recommendations. Anybody, obviously this is for community building. Anybody else, that would want to join the discussion. Anything else you need from us, Kenna, feel free to reach out. So like I said, Steve, Russ, and then you saw Val, then Ravi, I'm going to ask him to unmute again. He always hops on here too. I don't know if he's just a ghost, if that's really him, but yeah, if there's anything that you want from us, so here's your LinkedIn here. Yeah. Thanks again. And then any last questions for Kenna?
Kenna, I'm looking at your articles that are listed on this website, Muck Rack. Is there another better place to find a list?
Sure. So I actually have a personal website, and it's just kennacastleberry.com. So I will put that in the chat because that'll probably be the easiest place. It's obviously not going to have all the articles because I keep writing them and keep adding them. But under the media writing section on the website, there's a quantum and deep tech section. And then if you just click on writing, it's other writing stuff. So that'll be the best place to find everything compiled as opposed to different websites, hopefully.
Yeah, appreciate it, Kenna. And then
thank you, Kenna. You did a wonderful job.
Yeah, awesome job.
Excellent. Well, it was a pleasure meeting all of you, and thank you for listening to my chat. So
yeah, thank you. Enjoyed all the buzz in Colorado there with quantum.
Excellent.
We'll
see you all later.
Yeah, see you later.